They told us it was just a myth, a fantasy invented by ancient Greek poets and biblical scribes. For centuries, the kingdom of Tartessos was dismissed as nothing more than a legend, a tale of impossible wealth and vanished glory whispered across the Mediterranean world. They buried the evidence. We dig it up. In the sun-scorched plains of southern Spain, beneath layers of soil and centuries of silence, lies one of archaeology's most controversial discoveries. This is Tartessos, Europe's first great trading empire that was systematically erased from history. The ancient texts paint a picture of staggering wealth. Greek historians spoke of a kingdom where silver was so common it was used for everyday items, where merchants sailed ships laden with precious metals to the far corners of the known world. The Hebrew Bible mentions the land of Tarshish, believed by many scholars to be Tartessos, as the source of King Solomon's legendary riches. According to the Book of Kings, fleets would return once every 3 years, carrying gold, silver, and ivory. For 3 centuries, from roughly 900 to 600 BCE, this enigmatic civilization dominated the Western Mediterranean. They controlled vast mineral wealth from the Sierra Morena Mountains, operated sophisticated mining operations that wouldn't be matched for 1,000 years, and maintained trade networks that stretched from the Atlantic coast to the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. And then, in the late 6th century BCE, Tartessos simply vanished. Not through conquest, not through gradual decline, but through what appears to be deliberate, systematic erasure. One of the most powerful and advanced civilizations of the ancient world disappeared so completely that for over 2 millennia, serious scholars dismissed their very existence as fantasy. This is the Artifacts Detective, and today we're investigating how an entire empire can be erased from history, and what recent archaeological discoveries are finally revealing about Europe's first lost civilization. For decades, archaeologists searching for Tartessos came up empty-handed. No cities, no monuments, no clear archaeological footprint. The silence was so complete that most academics concluded the ancient sources must have been exaggerating or conflating multiple cultures into one mythical kingdom. But in 2023, the Earth began to give up its secrets. Near the town of Castuera in Badajoz, Spain, archaeologists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the academic community. Buried beneath centuries of soil, they uncovered 5 life-size stone busts, the first known human representations of the Tartessian people. These haunting faces, carved over 2,600 years ago, stare out at us across the millennia. Their features are distinct, their craftsmanship sophisticated, their very existence proof that Tartessos was no myth. These are the faces of a people who ruled the western edge of the ancient world, who possessed knowledge and wealth that made them legendary, even in their own time. They are also the faces of a people who perhaps sensed the darkness that was about to engulf their entire civilization. Welcome to the Artifacts Detective, where we investigate history's greatest mysteries through archaeological evidence. I'm your host, and today we're examining one of the most significant archaeological revelations of the 21st century, the rediscovery of Tartessos. To understand the magnitude of this investigation, we need to journey back to the collapse of the Bronze Age around 1200 BCE. As the great empires of the Eastern Mediterranean crumbled, a new power was rising in the far west. The indigenous peoples of southern Iberia, blessed with access to the richest mineral deposits in the ancient world, began forging a distinct civilization that would eventually become the Kingdom of Tartessos. What set the Tartessians apart from their contemporaries was their extraordinary mastery of metallurgy. The Rio Tinto mines, which they exploited from at least 900 BCE, have yielded evidence that rewrites our understanding of ancient technology. Carbon dating of wooden mining supports shows continuous operation for over 3 centuries. But it's not just the longevity of their mining operations that astounds archaeologists. It's their sophistication. Recent analysis of slag heaps and processing sites reveals that the Tartessians had developed techniques for extracting silver from jarosite ores. This is a complex chemical process requiring precise control of temperature and atmospheric conditions. They were achieving purity levels of 95%, a standard that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the late medieval period. The metallurgical workshops uncovered at sites like Huelva show evidence of mass production on an almost industrial scale. Dr. Sebastian Celestino from the Institute of Archaeology in Mérida has spent decades studying Tartessian sites. His team's findings have revolutionized our understanding of this civilization. The evidence shows that Tartessian metalworkers weren't just skilled craftsmen, they were effectively ancient chemists, understanding and manipulating complex ore bodies with a sophistication that challenges our assumptions about technological progress. But perhaps the most intriguing connections lie in the tantalizing links between Tartessos and the biblical world. The Hebrew Bible's references to Tarshish have long fascinated scholars. According to 1 Kings, Solomon's fleets sailed to Tarshish, returning with gold, silver, ivory, and exotic animals. For centuries, this was dismissed as typical ancient exaggeration. But recent archaeological evidence suggests these accounts may be more accurate than previously believed. In 2023 and 2024, excavations at Tartessian sites have uncovered pottery fragments that, when subjected to neutron activation analysis, match the chemical signatures of ceramics from biblical era sites in Israel. These aren't isolated finds. They represent a clear pattern of trade connections between the western and eastern edges of the Mediterranean world. Even more compelling are inscriptions found at the Rio Tinto mines. One partially preserved text, carved into a stone marker, mentions tribute being sent to the king beyond the rising sun. While we must be cautious about interpretation, the dating of this inscription to the 10th century BCE, precisely the era of Solomon's reign, raises intriguing possibilities. The most enigmatic Tartessian site is the sanctuary complex of Cancho, Roano. First discovered in 1978, but only recently fully understood, this massive structure reveals a level of astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist in Iron Age Iberia. The central chamber is aligned with mathematical precision to the summer solstice. Secondary chambers track the movements of specific celestial bodies, Venus, Mars, and key star clusters. What makes Cancho Roano particularly significant is its architectural similarity to Eastern Mediterranean sacred sites. The layout, with its central courtyard surrounding chambers and specific proportions, bears striking resemblances to temple complexes in the Levant. This isn't simply cultural influence. It suggests shared knowledge, possibly shared architects or builders who carried sophisticated understanding across the ancient world. The Tartessians were also master craftsmen in precious metals. The treasure of El Carambolo, discovered in 1958 near Seville, consists of 21 pieces of pure gold jewelry weighing nearly 3 kilograms. The technical sophistication of these pieces, including granulation, filigree, and complex soldering techniques, equals anything produced in the workshops of Egypt or Mesopotamia. But it's not just their technical skills that set the Tartessians apart. Analysis of their settlements reveals something remarkable about their society. Unlike the highly stratified civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean, Tartessian communities show a much more even distribution of wealth. There are no massive palace complexes dominating humble dwellings. No monument building on the scale of Egyptian pharaohs or Mesopotamian kings. What mainstream historical narratives have failed to adequately address is the true nature of Tartessos' disappearance. The conventional account suggests that the kingdom simply faded away, perhaps conquered by Carthaginians or absorbed by other cultures. But archaeological evidence tells a far more disturbing story. The excavations at Casas del Turunuelo have revealed something that challenges everything we thought we knew about the end of Tartessos. This site, systematically excavated since 2017, presents clear evidence of ritual destruction on a massive scale. The entire complex was deliberately destroyed around 500 BCE in what can only be described as cultural suicide. The archaeological team found over 50 horses that had been sacrificed and carefully arranged in the courtyard. Valuable objects, bronze cauldrons, ivory carvings, gold jewelry, had been deliberately broken before being buried. The buildings themselves were systematically burned, but this wasn't the chaotic destruction of warfare. Everything indicates careful, ritualized demolition. The lead archaeologist described walking into the excavation and feeling an almost palpable sense of deliberate ending. This wasn't abandonment. This wasn't conquest. This was a civilization choosing to destroy itself rather than submit to something they found intolerable. This pattern of ritual destruction has now been identified at multiple Tartessian sites across southern Spain. La Mata, Cancho Roano, Alicida all show the same evidence of deliberate destruction within a narrow time frame around 500 BCE. All were wealthy, functioning centers that were suddenly and systematically destroyed by their own inhabitants. The timing is crucial. This period coincides exactly with the aggressive expansion of Carthage into the Western Mediterranean. The Carthaginians, based in modern Tunisia, were establishing their own trading empire, one built on military might and strict hierarchical control. They needed the metal resources of Iberia, and Tartessos stood in their way. But this wasn't simply a matter of economic competition. Recent analysis of Tartessian society reveals why they may have chosen destruction over submission. Unlike the militaristic, hierarchical societies that dominated the ancient Mediterranean, Tartessian culture appears to have been remarkably egalitarian for its time. Settlement pattern analysis shows no evidence of the palatial complexes that characterize other Bronze and Iron Age civilizations. Instead, we find distributed centers of production and governance. Metallurgical workshops aren't concentrated in elite quarters, but spread throughout communities. Religious sites show communal rather than hierarchical organization. Even more remarkably, the limited Tartessian inscriptions that have been decoded suggest a form of governance that included elected councils and public assemblies. While we must be careful not to project modern concepts onto ancient societies, the evidence points to a civilization that had developed alternative forms of social organization, alternatives that threatened the emerging imperial model represented by Carthage. The Carthaginians weren't simply conquering territory. They were establishing a new order in the Western Mediterranean, one based on military dominance, rigid social hierarchy, and centralized control. Tartessos, with its distributed power structures and emphasis on trade over conquest, represented everything the Carthaginian model opposed. The systematic nature of Tartessos' erasure becomes clear when we examine what followed. Carthaginian records make no mention of conquering a great kingdom in Iberia. Greek and Roman sources, usually eager to record military victories, are silent about the fall of Tartessos. It's as if the entire civilization was not just conquered, but deliberately written out of history. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. At sites throughout former Tartessian territory, we find a clear break in material culture around 500 BCE. Tartessian pottery styles, religious symbols, and architectural techniques simply disappear. They aren't gradually replaced or transformed. They vanish completely, replaced by Carthaginian or indigenous styles that show no continuity with Tartessian traditions. The few Tartessian artifacts that survived did so by accident, buried in ritual deposits, hidden in remote locations, or incorporated into later structures by builders who didn't understand their significance. The Carthaginians appear to have conducted a systematic campaign to eliminate not just Tartessian political power, but their entire cultural legacy. As we piece together the fragments of Tartessian civilization, perhaps the most remarkable revelations concern their intellectual achievements. The stereotype of ancient Iberians as barbarians on the fringes of civilization crumbles in the face of mounting evidence that the Tartessians possessed knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for centuries. The astronomical alignments at Cancho Roano tell only part of the story. Recent analysis using advanced LIDAR technology has revealed that multiple Tartessian sites were positioned according to celestial patterns. These weren't random settlements, but carefully planned centers aligned with astronomical phenomena. The level of mathematical knowledge required for such planning rivals anything in contemporary Greece or Mesopotamia. At the sanctuary of La Marta, archaeologists uncovered a series of carved stone markers that appear to be calculation tables. When analyzed by specialists in ancient mathematics, these stones revealed a sophisticated understanding of geometry and possibly even trigonometric principles. The Tartessians weren't simply observing the heavens, they were calculating and predicting celestial movements with remarkable precision. Their metallurgical knowledge extended beyond practical applications. Analysis of metal artifacts reveals deliberate alloying to achieve specific properties: hardness, flexibility, resistance to corrosion. They understood that adding precise amounts of tin to copper created bronze with different characteristics. Their silver extraction techniques required understanding of chemical processes that wouldn't be formally described until the development of modern chemistry. Perhaps most intriguingly, scattered references in ancient sources hint at Tartessian writings that were particularly prized. Strabo mentions ancient laws of the Turdetani, descendants of the Tartessians, written in verse and supposedly 6,000 years old. While this age is clearly exaggerated, it suggests a literary tradition of considerable antiquity and sophistication. The few Tartessian inscriptions that have survived use a script that combines influences from Phoenician and indigenous Iberian writing systems. But recent breakthroughs in decipherment suggest this wasn't simply borrowed writing. The Tartessians had adapted and modified these scripts to create something uniquely their own, possibly including mathematical and astronomical notations that we're only beginning to understand. In 2024, the most tantalizing discovery yet emerged from a private collection in Portugal. A bronze plaque, authenticated as genuinely Tartessian, contains what appears to be a historical chronicle. Though translation is still ongoing, preliminary work suggests it describes diplomatic missions to distant lands and mentions celestial events that can be precisely dated. If these translations are confirmed, they would represent our first direct window into Tartessian historical consciousness. They suggest a people who saw themselves not as peripheral barbarians, but as participants in a wider Mediterranean world, connected through trade, diplomacy, and shared knowledge to civilizations from the Atlantic to the Levant. The destruction of Tartessian civilization represents more than the loss of a single kingdom. It was the erasure of an entire alternative pathway for human development. While the great empires of the Mediterranean world built their power on military conquest and rigid hierarchy, Tartessos had developed a model based on trade, distributed governance, and intellectual achievement. Their emphasis on astronomical observation and mathematical calculation, their sophisticated metallurgy and engineering, their apparent experiments with more egalitarian social organization, all of this represented a different vision of what civilization could be. And it was precisely because this vision threatened the emerging imperial order that it had to be so thoroughly destroyed. The Carthaginians understood that ideas can be more dangerous than armies. A successful alternative to their model of centralized, militaristic power could inspire resistance in other regions. So Tartessos had to disappear, not just as a political entity, but as a memory, as a possibility, as proof that other paths existed. We have journeyed through time to uncover a civilization that was meant to be forgotten. We have seen how an entire empire, one that commanded the mineral wealth of the ancient world, that developed technologies centuries ahead of their time, that created a society based on principles different from their contemporaries, was deliberately erased from the pages of history. The rediscovery of Tartessos in the 21st century is more than an archaeological curiosity. It forces us to confront fundamental questions about how history is written and rewritten. How many other civilizations have been lost, not to time, but to deliberate suppression? What alternative paths for human development have been closed off by those who wrote the histories we accept as truth? As each new excavation season brings fresh discoveries, we're not just uncovering artifacts and ruins, we're recovering possibilities. The Tartessian model, with its emphasis on trade over conquest, distributed power over centralized authority, intellectual achievement over military glory, offers a mirror to our own assumptions about the inevitability of certain forms of social organization. The faces of those stone busts discovered at Castuera look out at us across 2,600 years with expressions that now seem prophetic. Did they sense the coming darkness? Did they understand that their entire way of life was about to be extinguished? Or do those enigmatic expressions reflect a deeper knowledge? That truth, once buried, has a way of emerging when the world is ready to receive it. Today, as we grapple with questions of sustainability, governance, and social organization that echo those faced by our ancient ancestors, the wisdom of Tartessos seems particularly relevant. They showed that great wealth and power could be achieved without empire, that technological advancement could coexist with more egalitarian social structures, that there have always been alternatives to the patterns of domination that we too often accept as natural and inevitable. The artifacts don't lie. The evidence speaks for itself. And what it tells us is that Tartessos, Europe's first great trading empire, was real, was remarkable, and was erased because it represented a threat to those who believed power could only flow from the point of a sword. But they could not erase everything. In the buried sanctuaries and hidden workshops, in the carefully concealed ritual deposits and abandoned mines, the truth waited. It waited for a time when humanity would be ready to question the stories we've been told, to dig beneath the accepted narratives, to uncover the evidence that was meant to stay buried. This is the Artifacts Detective, and we've just scratched the surface of one of history's greatest cover-ups. The investigation continues, and with each discovery, we piece together not just the story of a lost civilization, but a reminder that the past is never quite what we've been told it was. What do you think about this discovery? Does this evidence convince you that entire civilizations can be erased from history? What other buried truths might be waiting beneath our feet? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to see more archaeological investigations like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Join us as we continue to uncover the evidence they tried to bury, to reveal the civilizations they wanted forgotten, to shine light on the alternatives they feared. Uncover more ancient mysteries. Follow the Artifacts Detective and join the investigation. Because history isn't just what happened, it's what survived. And sometimes, what was meant to be destroyed forever finds a way to speak again, if we're willing to listen. They buried the evidence. We dig it up. This has been the Artifacts Detective. Until next time, keep questioning, keep digging, and remember, the truth is out there, waiting beneath the surface.